Well, good morning. It's Monday already, and we've had an exciting weekend here on campus, and we are ready to continue with the Symposium on Ancient Greece. And we're happy that you're all here. We're hoping that you will join us. We have two more sessions immediately following this one today. There's one tomorrow, and then we have the finale activities on Wednesday, which there are two programs in the day. And then on Wednesday evening at 6 o'clock in the North Gym of McAfee, we hope you will join us for the closing activities, which will include lots of music and dance and presentation. Welcome, and I will ask Dr. Wabi to introduce our speakers today.
Thank you. Good morning. It's a lovely day, although we don't see the sun, but we are thankful for that great day. This is the last week for the symposium, and it has been a baby in our minds and our thoughts and dreams, and now it's approaching its end. People are asking already about next year's symposium. What will be the topic? So I'm sure it will be great. And to the best of my knowledge, Eastern Illinois University is the only university is doing such a thing. The Consul General of Greece said nobody approached her at all for such a thing about ancient Greece. So we are proud of what we were able to do, and I hope you enjoy this session. There are a lot of quotes about women. You can go to Google and Google what people said about women. You said, search for a woman behind everything, search for a great woman behind a great man. They said women are those individuals who use their left hand to shake a cradle and for the baby, and the right hand to shake the world. So in Egypt, we have a saying about the paradise is under the feet of women, of mothers, and lots of sayings you can say. And women in ancient Greece were not an exception, as we'll see. How would you introduce our two speakers today? Christina and Crystal. It's crystal clear. That is very difficult to introduce people who had lots of achievements in their careers and have been a blessing to many students and others who get in touch with them. I am always speechless when I see people such like this to introduce them with many topics they discuss with their students and the lives they touch. So why don't you ask Christina to come? Actually, Christina led us to Crystal, CC. So we'll start with you.
Oh, we're starting with Crystal.
It's crystal clear.
Yes, we
You
are
have a
starting with
microphone?
Crystal. I do.
And you are on your way.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I just want to say that this is my first semester at Eastern, and I love it here. I come from Virginia Tech, and I'm very proud of where I'm from, but we certainly don't do anything like this there. And so I really appreciate this opportunity to be here and to delve into a topic that I probably wouldn't normally look into. And it's already been so fascinating. And so today, we're going to talk about ancient Greek women, their specific and varied roles in family and society. And my role is to talk about more of the negative, more of, I think, what might be expected of women of that day. And then my colleague, Christina, is going to do this amazing presentation about how things weren't necessarily as they seem. And so I have to say that when I started looking for information on this, I thought, seriously, there's nothing good about women? And I'm so excited for you to see that part of the presentation. And so we're going to start with some quotes from a well-known philosopher of the time, Aristotle. So he said, the well-ordered wife will justly consider the behavior of her husband as a model of her own life. Neither splendor of vestments nor preeminence of beauty nor the amount of gold contributes so much to the commendation of a woman as good management in domestic affairs and a noble and comely manner of life. Females are naturally libidinous. They incite the males to copulation, and they cry out during the act of coition. And I always giggle when I read that. I can't help it. Woman is more compassionate than man and has a greater propensity to tears. So this is, I feel like, a very good way of showing the theme of one of the ways women were viewed. So women in ancient Greece. So in ancient Greece, women were either slaves, wives, or hetera. And hetera were single women. They served in an entertainment role very similar to prostitution. And they weren't citizens of Athens. They weren't free-born. And they usually started their lives as slaves. Because they weren't citizens, they were not allowed to marry. And interestingly, the main role of wives, though, I'm not quite sure they would want to marry, because the main role of wives was to be invisible. And I mean that literally. Women were supposed to stay out of sight. They were literally supposed to stay within the house and to remain within it. If something was needed from outside, a slave was sent to obtain it. And the main role of women, or wives, was to keep the home, raise the children, supervise slaves, run the house, and then finally, after doing all of that, bless you, to serve and obey their husbands. And then after doing all those things, when men were present, they were supposed to be silent. So then the hetera, as I've mentioned, they were supposed to have conversations with men during the festivals. Their purpose was to entertain the men, and they were allowed to be outside of the home. They were allowed to be out in public. And along with prostitution, that type of thing, and being skilled in conversation, they were involved in music, arts, that type of thing. And a lot of times they were midwives, which I think is very exciting. So even though they weren't able to marry, and in that had a lower status than wives, they were the most highly educated women in ancient Greece. They couldn't vote, they couldn't own land, but they had the highest education. And that's fascinating to me as someone with a doctorate. I think, would I want to be a wife? What would I want to be? So ownership, this topic of ownership. Women in ancient Greece were not viewed as human in the same way that men were viewed. They were viewed as property. In childhood, they were owned by their fathers, who picked their husband and then paid him a dowry. And in this, he truly did give her away. While we give women away today symbolically, she was literally given away in ancient Greece. And so upon marriage, women became the property of their husband. It was a business transaction of this property from this man's hands to this one's hands. And so where marriage wasn't an option for hetera, being single wasn't an option for citizens. And then we talk about education. Most women did not receive formal education. Now, the hetera were trained in things like music, like we were talking about, and conversation. But the primary form of education was received by women on how to run the home, and this was passed from mothers to daughters. And any other knowledge that a wife would have was passed from husbands to brothers. And so I give you this part of the presentation, and if I were you, I'd be sitting there going, oh man, what was it like to be a woman back then? Thank God I'm here today. But I'm going to pass it on to my colleague, who's going to hopefully get you as excited as I was when I saw this part of her presentation.
Thank you.
So thank you.
All right. You heard my colleague talk about their roles as wives and their roles as prostitutes and roles as their concubines. So today I will start with a little bit positive role. When we talk about ancient Greece, it means that we are talking about the history of 6,000 years. So the role of women in 6,000 years, we divided into two parts, like pre-classic, if this first four stages were the pre-classic era, and the last two are the classic era. The pre-classic era was hard to study because there was not much information available. To study that period, one has to rely on archaeology or the oral traditions or maybe just the myths of that period. But when we talk about the classical age, it is a lot of evidence for that period available, and even the classic Greeks were able writers, they were able poets and artists, and even the historians. So it seems that the role of a woman changed radically from pre-classical age to the classical age there. But the family life was very much alike. The family life then and today is similar, at the same time very different. monogamy prevailed. It means that men were supposed to marry one wife and wives were supposed to have one husband. At the same time, heterosexuality was also a norm. Men will only marry women and women will only marry men, not as we see today in our society. Parents will have larger families, and as the average age of men and women was very low, like women was 35 to 40 and men were like 40 to 45, so there was a possibility that children will lose either one or both parents before they grew up. So if they lose their parents, then it means that they will be a part of the family of their older siblings or become a part of the family of their slaves. So it was a very common practice in those days. Since the ancient times, the role of the women has been differentiated by class, but it is very traditional. The very traditional role which is played by women is to care for the family and remain submissive to her husband or whoever is the head of the household. Women were very much deprived from much of the freedom to speak and even inherit, but that was not the case in Sparta. The Spartan women had much more freedom than the other society. Even if they had the right, they were still very much secondary to their men. Now, just for your information, I will show you the map of ancient Greece. If you look at the map here, this is Athens and this is Sparta, which is not very far from, it may be 100 miles apart, but if we go back to the Spartan, they gave much more freedom, much more liberty to their women than the Athenians. These women, they learned to read and write, as well as they also disciplined in athletics and warlike skills. The Spartan women were skilled in sports like discus and race or whatever the sports were practiced at that particular time. These Spartan women, they also had the legal rights. They could own property and they could inherit land. It was in the Spartan law that if the woman had only one brother, she would definitely inherit the 50% of her brother's heritage there, okay? And if their husbands were gone for a long time because they were well-known soldiers and Sparta had a lot of wars at that time. So if her husband's gone for a long time, the Spartan women were allowed to have other husbands for themselves. It is also interesting to see that these Spartan women were trained to protect their land from the intruders. They could overtake and guard their property, till their men returned. And they were also trained in plantation and had many, many rights around themselves at that particular time. Of course, we talk about the different roles that these women were playing, but they had a lot of rights, they were freedom, but all these Spartan women were seen as a curse to mankind and or a plague worse than fire by many playwriters. The freedom or the roles that they were given at that time, it was not seen in any other elsewhere in the ancient world. They were free, but not as free as the modern women of today or even other time, But certainly they enjoyed their social status and they enjoyed the freedom of speech. So what kind of social roles that they played here? So this is a kind of few that I'm going to talk about, Of course, as wives, they had the freedom to participate in religious and festive activities, but as wives, their primary role was to stay submissive and stay indoors and raise their family and take care of the children. But the second role, which gave them a little bit freedom was the role of a courtesans. Courtesans were like the women who were educated, but they had no right to be a wife. They came from the poor kind of class, but they certainly had no right. They were well-educated, well-skilled women who helped men to have the good political know-how, but they couldn't participate in voting there. Concubines were kind of the cohabitors, They were unofficial wives of the civilized men or the wealthy men, They could help them have children if their wives were unable to have some. Prostitutes, we know it's very clear, they were just to entertain and please men. Wives were not allowed to go into the social gatherings. If males will host some kind of gatherings or feast, wives were kept indoor, whereas all these women were there to entertain and make them happy there. So the roles of courtesans, they range from being the dancers to the very cultivated and enlightened companions of these powerful citizens. Aspasia, I just want to talk about Aspasia, who is a very well educated and very well influenced in the course of politics. Pericles, this Aspasia was her Pericles courtesan, and he had a Pericles is a very well leader of a popular party and also a great Athenian statesman. He had a great respect for Aspasia as a philosopher and as a politician. Socrates also came, in fact, he came to see her and brought his friends and disciples along who brought their wives so that they can learn from Aspasia. So it means that yes, she was a well-known philosopher and a very well-known politician there. The other positive roles that these women played were the role of the priestesses. Many women feminists and many other historians, they report that women were very kind of secluded at that time. But Joan Bretton Connolly, in her book, she talks about, the book's title is Portrait of a Priestess, Women and Rituals in Ancient Greece. She talks about that, no, she presents some artifacts, the photographs of the artifacts and also the written text to challenge that. She says that no, women were not repressed and women were not secluded as the ancient feminists, as the Victorian and the feminist scholars are suggesting, okay? The role of the women in ancient Greece was also studied by reviewing as the women are portrayed in art. Ordinary women were portrayed in art as goddesses, and they're more mythological creatures there, okay? So it is interesting to learn that all mythology creatures that they are talking about, such as like sirens and sphinx, gorgons, scylla, and chimera, these are the mythological pictures, which is like half animal, half human face, and the half human face is the face of a woman. It's not a face of a man. Majority of the time, it is the face of a woman there. Okay, so all these ancient women, when they took the course of priesthood, there were different ways. There were a variety of ways how they would become or to get to the priesthood. But most commonly known were the 4 paths to the priesthood. So that was inheritance, allotment appointment, election appointment, or even the purchase. So election, which we are all kind of aware of, has spread from the civic to the very religious affairs in the first half of the 5th century BC. And it was used for more important priesthood. Some of the paths were combined, like allotment and appointment, So if you are elected, then sometimes you had to pay for that. So purchase was usually for the long time priesthoods there. In the Archaic period, which is like in the Hellenistic period, a priestess had good birth and also financial resources. In the area of this priesthood, women were kind of equals of men, if not greater than men, and they had a rightful share in the services of God. Women priestesses were very much involved in officiating the rituals for goddesses. For example, each year in Athens, a new sacred pelops was presented to Athena. And this garment, this special garment, was woven by the ladies, and even the presentation was made by these ladies. So it means that women, of course, they had a positive role there. So if we look at these priestesses, there were some very prominent priestesses of that time. If we look at the priestess of Athena, Polias at Athens, and the priestess of Demeter at Eleusis, so these are the priestesses, which were very much involved in the services for goddesses there. So how do we know that they were there? Their statues are available in their sanctuaries, and paintings of the goddess usually saw them holding libation bowls to receive the liquid offerings. And in the processions, women priests carried the holy items, which is like a very significant role that these priestesses were playing at that time. Okay, and a lot of times their pictures are shown in which they are praying with their raised arms and their palms facing upwards. So that is their way of praising or praying at that time. All these priestesses, they received some kind of financial benefits and legal benefits, okay? And they, on the top of everything, they had the social prestige. They might have the freedom from taxation, but certainly they had the right to own property, and they also had the priority to access the Delphic oracle at that time. Some could affix their seals on the documents, which is like authority, which is like if affixing your seal is like your authority. So they had that authority at that time, and they were also they were given the highest civic honor, which means that after their death, women were not buried properly, but these priestesses, after their death, they were given this highest civic honor, and which is like a great honor for many priestesses there. Along with the role of a priestess, there was another important role that these ancient Greek women played, and that was the role of a role in the politics. These classical Greek women, they had no right to vote. You heard Crystal say that they had no right to vote, and they did not have much direct involvement in the politics. Though the courtesans, like Aspasia, I mentioned earlier, they were very well-known politicians there, and they knew how to influence the men's political life and even the masculine subjects there. During the times before or just after the Trojan War, which was about 1200 BC, women were involved in politics there. But they had very little to do with the state affairs, okay? But only the Oracle of Delphi was the one who was often consulted in the state matters, okay? And she was the one who could advise the politicians only. Early in the history, this is very interesting to know that, early in the history of Greece, before 1250 BC, women were allowed to vote. And there was a time when they had to decide who should be the patron deity of Athens at that time. So there were two candidates. One was Athena and other was the Poseidon. So all women, they supported Athena, and all men, they supported Poseidon. Okay? So all women, they voted for Athena, and all men, they voted for Poseidon. So since there was one more woman than men, so Athena won. So after that, men got so offended, they took their right, they stripped them off from their right to vote till the time, the modern ages. So after that, women, they were able to write before, but after that incident, no, they took their right away from them. So powerful, all these women, or the ancient Greek women, they were also famous or well-known queens. There is a time they say that, were these queens the rulers also? But they don't know. But certainly at the time of Trojan War, there was some question that if these Greek queens were the rulers there. These Amazon queens actually were the rulers, but not strictly the Greek women. They were not necessarily the Greek, but they were the queens. But the powerful queens, if we look at these queens, Crystal, can you pronounce it for me,
Penelope.
please? Penelope, Jocasta, and Clytemnestra.
Mm-hmm.
These were the very famous queens of that time, And then there is another incident that we can talk about, Nausicaa, who instruct Odysseus, that to clasp her mother when he begs the Phaeacians to help him, So that incident also kind of predict or suggest that, yes, she was the ruler of that time there, okay? Then if we go to the historical queens there, then it will be very important to talk about the Dido of Carthage, which is also like the Artemisia the first, and who was the queen of Halicarnassus period there. So, of course, this classical or Greek is full of all the philosophers. When we talk about Socrates, when we talk of Plato, these are the well-known philosophers of their time. And in his own quote, Plato wrote that in the states of Crete and Sparta, there were not only men, but also women who were proud for their intellectual culture. So it means that there were quite a handful of women who were very kind of famous in the philosophy there. So philosophy, which was a very much predominantly a male profession, they were not involved because their primary role was to stay indoor, raise their family, and take care of the household. But there were some significant minority of the women who actually contributed in the search of wisdom in the pre-classic and even the classical age there. They received, you heard Crystal say that they received their basic education from mothers and from there, but certainly these women who searched for wisdom, they were actually given a chance to enter this philosophy field. So why they were deprived to enter the philosophy field? Because for that, the practice was that they will discuss theories in groups, and women were not allowed to mingle if they are kind of the wives and come from the good class there. But a handful of women were given the freedom to enter the field of philosophy. And those women who were given the chance to enter the field of philosophy, they did great. They really did great. Pythagoras, who is known as a feminist philosopher, he started his own school, which is called the Pythagorean school. And there were many men. Pythagoras was a well-respected man of that time, and many men, they brought their wives and gave in his kind of in charge. They gave them in his charge so that they can learn of his doctrine. And this Pythagorean society gives more freedom, more liberty to the women. So his wife Theona, after his death, it was very unfortunate that he died in the fire in their house. So after his death, his wife Theona and their 3 daughters, who were very well educated, they became kind of very much involved. Theona became the director of the Pythagorean school, and their 3 daughters, who were very well educated, they helped their mother to run the society, the school that they had. So this is the picture of Theona. So she was a very famous woman, of a Pythagoreans, because she was his wife. And she wrote on the numbers theory, and she also explained it as a principle to create order that helped to distinguish one thing from another. She also talks about the immortality of souls and the transmigration of souls, and verifies that Pythagoreans believed in the divine justice, that after life, the transfiguration happens. After your death, the souls leave your body and then it enters another body, which is not necessarily a human body. So that's what the Pythagoreans believed in. They also believed that in a harmonious universe, everything has a specific role and place and functions according to some laws, according to the laws of physics, the laws of logic, and also morality or religion. So Theona, she also wrote about the ethics that women should adapt in everyday life. Another well-known philosopher of that time is Ate of Cyrene. Ate of Cyrene, as the head of the Cyrene school, she grew up to believe the egalitarian roles, which is like very much reflected in her philosophy. She wrote, quote, "I dream a world where there is no master nor slave." So she is believing more in equality. So, she was given another highest honor in that society, that epitaph of her tomb inscribed, the splendor of Greece with the beauty of Helen, the virtues of Therma, the soul of Socrates, and tongue of Homer. Such an inscription is like a honor, great honor for women of that time. So just to conclude my presentation, I will say that in ancient Greece, women's primary role was to take care of the family, give her husband. She was raised by a father. She was to be disciplined and very submissive, obedient woman. Before marriage, she was supposed to be obedient to the father, and once she is given in marriage, she is submissive to her husband. She stayed indoor and carried out their daily household chores and nurtured the children. As wives, they were to participate in religious and festive activities. But then they played another role which gave them some freedom, the role of courtesans, the role of concubines, and the prostitutes. It gave them some freedom. But the roles they played as priestesses, politics, and philosophers not only gave them the freedom, but also brought them the honor. No matter what role they played at that time, it certainly brought them satisfaction and joy, as the joy and satisfaction we get by playing the roles in today's life. Okay, thank you.
Thank you both for a nice presentation.
Thank you.
Any questions from the floor? I have a couple if you don't have. But if you have, I'll give you the... Let me ask a question for each of our distinguished speakers, and then I'll give you the chance. In your studies and research, did you find any back door or front gate where women could move from the obscurity or from being neglected or being set aside to being a goddess, which is the highest thing, or being a ruler or being a woman in power? Is there any back door that, for example, if she is the relative of one big shot here, he would sneak her into there? That's what I
Yes,
mean by back door.
when I was talking about the priestesses, inheritance, when they become they inherit those from their family. And if they have resources, they could buy those powers also.
So they can.
Yes, they can. Yes,
So
they can.
would you consider this a back door or a front gate?
I think it's a front gate. It's
Front
not a
gate.
back
They
door.
go
No.
in the light.
Yes,
and they-
I think it's a front gate.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. For you, you have, yes, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, look, thinking about the hetera, the prostitutes, and how even though in a sense they were of a lower class, they were the most educated. And as a function of not being freeborn, they were able to be educated and were able to have conversations with men. And in that, I wonder if they influenced men through their ability to have conversations and in that way influenced society around them. And I think that would be more like a backdoor, most definitely.
Okay. Now, talking about this profession, if it's a profession, in World War II, we read about women doing this for spying and for having influence on some leaders and the wars and politics.
Wow.
Did you read anything about they having influence into big decisions in this way?
I didn't, but
Okay.
I could definitely see it.
Okay.
Absolutely.
When I was studying, when I was reading all this, this prostitution was a legal profession at that time. It was a taxable profession.
Oh, really?
So it was not for spying. It was just their way because they belonged to they were the children of slaves. And at that time, women were really looked down upon. Families, if they have their daughters, they were not happy to have daughters. They wanted boys. So sometimes the families will abandon their daughters, So when they get abandoned, so of course they will raise by slaves and then they will use them for this prostitution. So I don't think so that it was used for spying. It was just like a way of making money. Yeah.
Question for both of you. You mentioned the word educated, quote unquote. Did you read anything about what system of education did they have to go to school, to sit with Aristotle, or what type of education to say I'm educated?
I think there was no formal education there, When I was talking about the women of Sparta, they were raised, they got educated from their mothers and then by their husbands and their other male members. And then we talk about Pythagorean society, where they had all these intellectuals, they started their own schools. And all these wealthy people, they brought their wives into there so that they can learn about their doctrines. I think that there were no formal schools, but all such schools which they taught them the philosophy and other doctrine there.
That was something that I wondered. Where did the hetera get their education? And that was something I couldn't find. And I don't know if I wasn't searching correctly, but I want to know what was the system that they went through to get their education and what did it entail? I mean, because we know that wives were taught how to run a home, but what, was it math? Was it, I was going to say English, but, what exactly was it that they learned?
Yes,
So-
to become educated.
So, yeah.
We hear about Socrates and Plato and the way they taught, they have their disciples with them living day by day seeing their master or their
Mm-hmm.
teacher, quote unquote, live and speak, and they learn from his silence even. Do we have any similar with women? Do we have philosopher, like you said, there are
Tay
philosophers?
of
Do
Cyrene.
they have
Mm-hmm.
students also or
Yes,
disciples?
yes, yeah. So, like Pythagorean school, when his wife, Theona, when she started, so she was the director, and they had a lot of women students in that school. So she
Okay.
was like the
Do
teacher
you
there.
consider her having a step ahead of other women because she was the wife of, so she got some privileges or some?
Privilege is there, yes, of course. This is like important, and even in today's society, if you are born in a privileged class, then you are given more privileges as compared to others, those who are less fortunate.
What is their effect on their children? Do they uh, uh, groom them in the same path or as a family? Or she forgets about her role as a family? Or
Do you mean? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't think so, that they can, because their primary role was to be a wife and a mother. So how
okay,
can you forget that primary
you
role?
can't.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that was
Absolutely.
like a varied roles, but their specific role was to be a wife and a mother. So they
Yes.
never forgot.
Okay. Any other questions? Yes. Another question. Yes.
First of all, I can't imagine surviving that era as, as a wife and mother. What did you see any information about consequences for the wives who didn't perform as expected? I as a mother and I have a son, I wanted to, make every opportunity available to him. And I think that that's one of the things that we're all guilty of that. We
Yeah.
want that for all of our children. So I would probably be in trouble all the time. I'm just curious what my
Yeah.
consequences would be.
That's a good
Yeah.
question.
It was interesting when I was researching, when I was studying, So, of course, I did not come up with any abuse at that time. Of course, maybe they didn't document it, whatever was the reason I didn't come across. But males, if women were unable, we talked about concubines and we talked about courtesans, So, those were the women who actually entertained men. And concubines were like the cohabitors, that if they were unable to have children from their wives, so they can bring unofficial wife, then they can they can start their family, because their main idea was to have children, have larger families. So I didn't see any kind of abuse or
I
nothing
didn't.
like yeah.
I didn't see anything either, but I would agree that the main consequence is not being the only woman in the house. Not being that main person there. And I'm sure they're there though, and I'm wondering if it's because of whatever the punishment was so normalized that that it wasn't even seen as something to write about. I don't know. But.
Thanks. Any other questions? Yes.
I just following up on what you're talking about with the prostitutes and their education. It seems to me that perhaps there. I don't know. I'm surmising here that there might have been a route for education, but the presence of being able to be with educated people constantly and in groups would lead to the education and make them more able to speak of politics and know what's going on in the community, rather than if you're spending time just at home or tending the home or tending the children. You're spending your time, an important time with children, etc. But your children aren't speaking to you about the politics of the country or the nation state or whatever. And so I think it goes back to sort of like this geisha role that we've seen in Japan and elsewhere there, that it was just being at the table, and being nearby and sitting there, you will get to know what the themes are of the day. Because, I think today, well, at least here in the U.S., we think of prostitution as sort of a two people going off to a quiet place, where I think in that society, though, it might be that that wasn't so. They would be taking meals, they would be going to events where there would be lots of people from whom they could learn, and then be elevated to the next conversation, I
Exactly.
suppose.
Yeah.
But,
Exactly. Yeah, in that time, when all these men, they held their big feast, women, their wives were not supposed to go.
That's
They were
right.
not allowed to go. But all these feasts were well entertained by these women. So I agree, that they got to learn from them also.
Absolutely.
Well, I noticed you are writing a lot. I noticed you are writing. Now, we didn't expect me to ask you a question. If I asked you what question came to your mind while these presenters were talking, anything that you said, ah, what's that?
Well, I'm
Has
actually
it-
doing a research paper on women's roles. Oh yeah, I'm actually doing a research paper on women's roles in ancient Greece. So,
Oh, wow.
Caitlin, yes. I just have a question. So you said women in Sparta, if there's one brother, she inherits half of
Half.
the land.
Yes, half of the heritage, whatever, not necessarily the land, whatever the household things are also. They
Okay.
will be divided between brother and the sister.
So if there's no sons, would she get the land 100%?
She will get the 100% of it.
Not her husband.
Not her husband. no.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was a little curious about that.
Yes.
So how would the husband feel about her inheriting land?
Oh,
Do you-
that's a
Interesting.
good
Yeah.
question.
Yeah. So then they will get 50-50 and she is deprived.
That's
Yeah.
a great question, though.
Yeah. So I don't know.
Interesting. I'll have to
So
look it up.
maybe, oh yeah, that's a good question, you know.
That's a
So,
wonderful answer. I don't know.
yeah,
That's
no,
really an answer.
I think that male, because it was a male, and still we are living in a very male-dominant society, you know. So every man is not very kind to those women who are more powerful there. So I guess it was the same that we see in today's society.
Now, when you say male-dominated society, when they voted for a god or goddess, and the women won, and that's why.
That's why they deprived, they shred,
Absolutely.
I mean, they stripped them
men
off from that right.
accepted that vote.
Yes,
And
yes.
they didn't overturn it.
No, no,
But
they
they
didn't.
overturned the right of voting.
Yeah, till the modern age.
Yes.
Till the modern age, you know.
So they accepted that vote, okay?
Yeah.
But
Because they
were.
were raised to be submissive.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, another question from here. Say your name, please.
Hi, I'm Lashana. I had a question about the role of women after they became citizens, and especially in Athens, because I know they didn't gain citizenship until after Pericles. Did that guarantee them the right to vote? And if so, did they gain any political power in doing so?
After that, you know, once the women of Sparta were the first group to get the reins, you know, and then after that, you know, there were so many wars between Athens and Sparta. And once Athens surrendered, you know, and became the part of Sparta, that is the time when the Athenian women got some rights. They got some freedom there, okay? And yes, they didn't get to vote, but they had a little bit contribution in their political ways.
Very
Good question.
Another question here.
Was there, my name's Paul. Was there ever any, was there ever any, just kind of women that just kind of wanted to rise up a little bit,
Oh,
meaning
wow,
they didn't
sure.
like their position, and there was any kind of struggle or anything like that?
I'm sure there were. I think that's a natural tendency in all humans, you know, to kind of fight back when they feel oppressed. What I wonder, though, is what it was that would cause a woman to realize her situation could get better. I didn't see anything directly in the research that I did about rising up, but I'm sure they wanted to, at the very least. So.
Any other questions from this side or this side? That's your opportunity. Now, the last question to you is to ask you what questions you didn't find answers to while you're doing research. But before that, I'll ask you a question about the dresses we noticed.
Oh.
I gather these paintings come from a later date. It's not-
Yes,
they didn't
yeah.
have. We don't have paintings from
No,
that time.
no, because the pre-classical time there was no data available, because those time was there was not much education. People were not. You can only go to archaeology or the myths that these are the pictures. These are the things which are from the classical era and onwards. You know.
Later, okay.
Yes. So of course
You
you know
mean the
these
classical ancient Greece or classical Europe?
classical ancient Greece, you know,
Oh, so we
classical
have
ancient.
paintings
Yes,
from that time?
yes,
Okay.
yes, they are, because they were historians, they were able writers and poets, you know, so they could tell them. And even when we look at the statements that we talked about, the quotes from Aristotle, you know, so it means that there were some documentation available at that time.
Okay. Now, my question regarding the dresses, they have big pieces of cloth. I mean, that means they have industry to do these and industry to tailor them or
Yeah, how
cut
to
them.
weave them.
Because, I mean, it's not like a piece of 3 feet or 3 yards from this piece. It is like big.
Yeah. So they were not the drapes, but those were the kind of the stitched clothes that they wore. That's what you mean?
Yeah, I mean, did you read anything about how did they have all this amount of textile or painting? I mean, dyeing. It's a big industry. It's not like small piece of cloth.
Mm-hmm.
So
That could be trade.
that could be the trade. Yeah.
Came, the ships brought it.
Yeah.
Trading. Okay. Very good.
That could be the trade.
You have questions, Ben? So what are, we have 2 minutes to answer this, 1 minute for you, 1 minute for her. What, 1 or 2 questions that you, while you're researching, you find this no answer, but you'll keep it for the future.
Yeah.
Any other questions to keep
Yeah,
us, leave
while
us
I
with-
was preparing, the only concern that I had, I was trying to put myself in that age, and if I'm a wife, how can I tolerate my husband to have other women and still be a normal human being? My husband is there, so I was imagining, I was putting myself in those shoes, and I said, it is so hard. You have to have a big heart to have other women entertain your husband while you are raising your children and being there. So that was my only concern.
Very good.
Well, and I had two. My first was I wondered if they were relieved that there could be someone who came in, because, and I know that this was further down the line, but in Henry VIII's time, if women couldn't give any children or the gender that they wanted, they were put to death. And so I wondered if there was a relief that they didn't have to have these children. But my other question was, what was the relationship of fathers with their children?
Yeah.
And that certainly wasn't addressed in what I was looking at. And, I wanted to know, was there a relationship? Was fatherhood prevalent? Was it something that was seen as important? So,
Are you planning to insert or interject some of this study that you did in your classrooms? Somehow just hint,
absolutely.
Yes, I already do. Ask my
Absolutely.
students, I already do. I talk about that. This is the time. Aren't we fortunate that we are living in this time? We have so many rights.
Very good.
Yes.
Would you please join me in thanking them for a wonderful presentation? You got yours, Christina.
Yes, I got mine. Yes.
Oh.
Christina already has received it. We would like
Oh.
to present you with a
Well, thank
commemorative
you.
certificate for participating with us. And
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that.
excellent.
Thank you for giving us this opportunity to be a part of this
Oh,
symposium.
wonderful.
Thank you. Please check your programs and catch up whatever you have until Wednesday of this session.